Hi everyone, thank you for watching Renovation School. On this episode I'm going to be showing you how to install vinyl or laminate flooring, and I'm going to reveal a lot of tips and tricks just so you can get a very professional result. Let's get to it. In this case, I had carpet flooring installed on the floor already, so I had to remove this before I get any further. Using a good quality knife and a blade makes it a lot easier on you. I like using these Olfa blades and knives. I love them, they do an amazing job. I always cut my carpet in 6-foot sections. It's just so much easier to move it around, and later on when I go to the dump, it's easier to fit this in any truck. Most of the time the foam underlayment is a staple to the subfloor, but in this case it wasn't, and it made it a lot easier for me to remove it. So I fold it away and I throw it out. So it's time to remove these carpet holders. I get myself a pry bar and I remove them like so. I cut a flooring box like this and I throw all those carpet holders in it. They have sharp nails on them, so if I keep them in this box, no one's gonna get hurt. Again, in my case, there was no staples in the floor. If there was any, I would have removed them before sweeping up the floor. These are my favorite screws for any subfloor project. Because they have a fine and a coarse thread on them, they tend to have a better grip, so they can keep the subfloor and the joist super tight together. After sweeping up the subfloor, I am going to start putting some screws into the subfloor and the floor joists. It's always better to put a lot of screws in it. For areas like this, which is in front of the door, I normally add a lot of screws in these areas because that's going to be a very high traffic area. So if you want to prevent a squeaky or noisy subfloor, it's an amazing idea to add a lot of screws. If you don't know the location of your floor joist, just take a look at your subfloor. There's going to be rows of screws or nails in a big line. You can tell where exactly they're located. Now look how many screws I put in front of this doorway. It's a high traffic area and I always use many screws in these high traffic areas. It's very important. This is the trick. This is going to do the job. Basically, builders use nails, and after you walk on them for so long, they loosen up, and then the subfloor rubs against it and it leaves that squeaky noise, which is not very pleasant. Imagine these 3 dots that I'm putting on the subfloor right now are the nails that were left by the builder. I am going to place 1 screw on either side of these just to prevent any future squeak from any of these nails. Before I move to the flooring process, I get myself a 6-inch putty knife and I go over all those screws and nails, making sure there's nothing sticking out. If any of those nails are sticking out, I'm going to hammer them down. This is an oscillating saw that I have. Take a look at the blade. See, that's the direction that I put this blade on at all time. This way it's gonna fit in any angles. Before I sweep up the floor one more time, I am gonna cut under all these door jambs. This way there's not gonna be any dust or imperfections on the ground. I like to cut the bottom part of all my door jambs. This way my flooring can slide right underneath, and when the job is done, it looks super nice and uniform. You kind of feel like the flooring was installed first and then the doors and everything else was built on top of it. So this is how I use this saw. I put a little bit of the flooring and a piece of underlayment underneath of it, just so I can cut the same amount right from the bottom of those door jambs. If your flooring doesn't have an underlayment attached to it, this is what I like to use. This is a 3mm underlayment. It has a lot of rubber properties which makes this soundproof when you walk on it. Plus it's going to give you a pleasant feeling when you walk on this floor after the flooring is installed. I always lay my flooring to the width of the room. This makes the room look bigger and nicer. So I am going to start by putting the underlayment down. I put it across the room like this, and then I place something heavy on one side and cut it from the other side. It's very important to cut the openings for the air vents. This way you're not going to miss them when you're laying down your flooring. The first row of any flooring job is the most important part of it. To ensure I'm not going to have a small piece, I always lay down some planks of the flooring across the room just to ensure I have the biggest possible sizes for my very first row. This way I'm not going to have a small piece at the very end of this room. Okay, it's time to install the flooring. I'm going to install them this way because this is the length of the room. When it's done, this room is going to look longer and kind of better. If I go the other way, it kind of makes the room look smaller. Plus I'm going to have many cuts, which I don't want to have that. So I am going to start from this end. Right now I show you how I do this. I've done many houses this way and it worked perfect. This wall here is extremely straight. I don't have to do any finicky work. Sometimes your baseboard is installed high or your flooring could be not as thick as what I have here. This is a 12mm thickness laminate floor I'm installing, so it doesn't slide underneath of my baseboard. And plus my wall is straight, I can just install it as is right away. It can go right into it. But if your wall is not straight, if it's bowed out or bowed in, you can use a straight edge, put it down. It could be a piece of 2x4 by 8, 10, whatever size that you like. You can put this on. Right now I'm not worried about putting the spacers. Basically, the deal with the laminate flooring or vinyl floor is to have spacers between the baseboard and your flooring. This flooring system has to have at least 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch space all around the room, because this flooring will expand and contract a little bit. You don't want this to bow up in the middle of your room. You could even cut that 2x4 on the edge just so you have a nice and a straight edge. So this is how I normally install it. I lay down my floors along this side. I want to start with the biggest pieces first. My first room must have the biggest, longest pieces. So I installed those. I just put them loosely on the ground, making sure I get full pieces or bigger pieces. I don't want to end up having a little or half-inch piece at the very end. If it is like that, I'm going to cut my first one smaller so I have a bigger piece at the very end of the room. So I'm going to start by this. And also keep in mind, different manufacturers make the tongue and groove systems on the different side. On my case, the tongue is this way and the groove is that side. So I can, I have to kind of build it from this end. I have to go this way, start from right to left. Sometimes it's the opposite way. You have to start from the left side of the room and go to the right side. In my case, this is how it is. This piece has a damage, I'm not going to use it. Simply put it aside. I'm going to start with this. Nice and straight. For the set now, keep in mind I'm not finishing the whole room right away. I'm not going to build this first row. The trick is to make a nice core and continue that along the room. If you keep doing this one piece at a time, you're not going to establish that goal. It's not going to go easy. It's going to be extremely difficult. The first 2 or 3 rows are the most important part of any flooring installation job, and it has to be done right. If these are not installed right and proper, the whole system will be crooked. It's not going to line up nice and proper. Then you're going to end up having gaps in them, and later on when you walk on them, they're going to crack, they're going to start making noise. So this is extremely important to follow these steps, and this is how I do it. In order to lock these floorings together very nice and perfect and make them last for a longer time, it's very important to stagger the joints, as you can see here on the right side of the picture. What I mean by staggering the joints is every time I start a new row, I make sure the end cuts are at least 8 inches apart from each other. If it's more than 8 inches, that's perfect. I just don't want to go any smaller than 8 inches. Another thing that I like to avoid is going with that 8 joint pattern that you can see on the left side of the picture. It's very common for masonry work. It's not recommended for any type of wood or laminate or vinyl flooring system. It's not going to look too good. It looks so much better if you go with a mixed pattern. Now to achieve that staggered joint pattern, I am going to cut my second piece of flooring about 8 to 10 inches smaller than the first row. So this is how it goes together. And I have a tapping block and a small mallet. You need to tap them in at least 3 or 4 spots to make sure this groove is as tight as possible. You have to make sure this sits nice and perfect in that spot. So now I did my second, I'm going to go with the third one as well. That area, I have air vent. I'm not worried about it as of right now. I just want to continue making a nice, I'm going to establish a nice line here first. This tool is pretty amazing. You can rent this from Home Depot, Lowe's, wherever you want. And if you're doing a full house, you can even buy one of these. It's called laminate or vinyl flooring cutter. So that's my third row. I installed it just like that. I'm not going to tap this in because I have to cut it. There is a vent here. So right there, this is perfect right now. It's sitting in place. I am going to continue this. Push it out like so. I'm kind of lining it up with this one. And make sure your flooring is sitting nice and flush against that. I'm going to move the camera over there so you can see the rest of this. Alright, so I put this wood, I kind of slide it this way. I'm going to leave it the way it is. Just make sure there's no gap, or when you hit it, it's going to kind of bounce around and it's going to make it weak. So I set my next piece into the groove there. Make sure it's sitting nice and perfect along there. And sometimes these little pieces can break while you're moving it, or if you hit something. Make sure there's nothing in between this groove here. Make sure it's completely nice and clean before you put the other piece in. It's very, very important. Before you lock the next one in, you have to make sure it's kind of nice and clean. So the next piece on the second row, there you have it. I put it in. I kind of put it in an angle, kind of get it to sit in, and then I play with it and push it down. The first row is a bit difficult, but when you get it going, it's going to be pretty easy. So you just kind of, I'm holding that and pushing onto this so it sits into that groove. Once I make sure it's sitting on the seam and on this seam, then I'm going to tap it in. That looks nice and perfect. If I didn't have that vent, I would definitely go for the third one, but I have to make a cut on that third row. So I am just going to continue with the 2 right now. So this way I'm going to push it again, making sure kind of this is passed by this cut. I'm going to leave it there and continue doing this until I get to the end of the row. And then I'm going to show you how I'm going to adjust that spacing in here. For that end piece, I'm going to flip this flooring the other way. go all the way to the baseboard and mark it right where it needs to be cut. This piece is not garbage, this could be used on the other side. I removed that wood that I had in the back side. Now I have that gap in the very back. I'm going to sit in the center of the room and try to push this back so I can hit to the baseboard. I'm going to push it tight to the baseboard. I'm going to explain that in a few seconds. So this is how I do this. I push it very slightly. I push it all the way in. I make sure it hits to that baseboard. Don't worry about it. I'm going to show you how I place my the spacers now in a few seconds. So I have many different types of spacers. I'm going to pull this slightly back and place these in place. I want to give it around a 1/4 inch space. I pulled it back. I push this in place. I'm going to let it go as far as it can go inside there. There you go. First one is good. The pieces are this long. I'm going to put another one in the center part right there. If it doesn't fit that way or the gap is too much, I'm going to place 2. There you go. Now it's very important to put one where exactly your seam is. You have to put it right in the center of the seam. The seam is sitting right there and I put it right there. So it's covering half of this piece and half of the other one. All the way in, make sure it doesn't go anywhere, and this space must be completely tight. So now again, half of this board, I put another piece in. Another seam here, I'm going to put another spacer right where that seam is. And along the way I'm going to find a good spot for more spacers. There you go. I have 3 different types of spacers with me, but normally you get these types that has they look like a wedge. One side is wide, the other side is thinner. So you just try the thinner side. If it doesn't go, you can flip it the other way. And keep in mind, this baseboard could be in or out. It's completely normal for it. This gap is never perfect. This could be maybe 1/8 in some areas. It could be about 3/8, or it could be even almost 1/2 inch in some areas. That's because the wall is never super perfect and straight. So don't be too fussy with that. The 1/4 round that we put at the end of the video will cover that up. So I got to that 3rd row area. You may notice that I'm not placing any spacers here. I'm maintaining that 1/4 inch gap in between the flooring and the baseboard. The reason why I'm not putting any spacers there is because the flooring system that I'm using, it's very high quality. It's a drop and click type. It drops into these tongs and it clicks right in here. As soon as it goes down, as soon as it's sitting in place, it locks in. There are some type of laminate floors or vinyl floors. After you drop it, you have to tap it on this side so it slides into this. Mine is not like that. This is the reason why I don't have any spacers. If you have that type, you have to put spacers there as well, because when you're tapping these in, it's going to go this way and it's going to put pressure against this baseboard. So it's time to put that 3rd row and keep going this way. So I have that vent here, the heat register. This is how I mark it. I put the piece in place and then I find both sides of the vent. I mark them. I'm going to show you a close-up of this now. So this is where my vent is. I made a mark along this edge and the other edge. Now I'm going to pull this back and kind of eyeball where this line is, just like that. And then I put this a straight edge along there. This is my block. You could use a square. After drawing my lines and making the shape that I want, I take it to my jigsaw. It's pretty nice to have a jigsaw around. It's my favorite tool whenever I do flooring. It's lightweight and it pretty much can cut any shape that I want. For the most part, this is the blade that I use for it. It's made by Bosch. It does a very nice and a smooth finish. As you can see here, the cut is pretty amazing. So it is time to put that piece of flooring back in. Look how nice and perfect that cutout look now, just like what it's supposed to be. So it's very important to tap every single piece of flooring in place. If this step is missed, the flooring is not going to sit nice and strong together, and later on it might come loose. Now that we established a good line and those two first rows are done, I am going to place some more stock on top of that 2 rows so I can continue doing this and install more flooring. After placing this plank in place and tapping it, it's time to make another cut for that air vent. The same exact way that I showed you earlier, I made my marks and I cut down that piece, and then we're good to go. It's pretty important not to forget about that staggering joint pattern. As you can see on here, I have a lot of space between the 2 end parts of those planks. It's a very good practice to put the vent cover back on as soon as possible. This way there's no chances of stuff falling inside it, and also you can see how good your cut was. Now this is an extra piece that I have from the cut that I made on the opposite side of the room. This piece is about 10 inches, so I'm good to use it. If this cut is less than 8 inches, I would not use it as a starter piece. But this one, as I said, is 10 inches, so it's good to go. I'm going to use some wood glue just to lock this in place in case there's any kind of a heavy furniture sitting on top of it. And if someone by any chance moved that furniture, I don't want this piece to come off. Now the rest of the room is pretty easy and straightforward. I just start making 3 rows at a time here because these planks are pretty wide. I keep on doing this until this whole area is done. I am going to show you how exactly I make my cuts around the door jambs and inside the closets and finicky areas that are slightly more difficult to do. So we're getting to some of those difficult cuts. This is how I put this plank in place, and I mark where exactly it needs to be cut. I am going to show you a close-up of how I cut them or mark them. As you can see here, I marked it in a way so when I cut it, that little end piece is going to be right underneath of the door jamb. That way it's going to be vanished, so you won't see any cuts or any imperfections into the flooring. This is after the cut is done. Look how nice and perfect it's gonna get disappeared right under that trim. It's time to install the very last plank in this row. I'm gonna lock a plank under the last piece that I installed, and then I use a scrap piece on top of it so I can make my mark and know how much to cut. And then I transfer these marks that I got from that scrap piece to my good piece, and then before I cut it, I'm actually going to show you a sketch so you can have an idea of how it's going to look before I cut it. Now to finish that closet, I put a loose plank in place and I made marks where exactly my door jambs are, and then I took my tape measure and I measured exactly how much I have to cut from each side of that plank. It's very important not to forget we're gonna hide these cuts right under the door jamb, so we have to make this slightly bigger than the opening. Every time I install a piece from the back like this, I'm extremely gentle with it, as you can actually break that tongue and it's going to be very difficult. You have to replace that whole piece. The key is to move that back piece up and down a little bit to make sure it sits in place first before you tap it. After tapping it from the back, I stepped on it. This way it doesn't move, and then I tapped it from the front as well, making sure it sits nice and snug in place. I decided to install a few more planks in the front section just so I can build another strong core again here. After that, I moved to the closet area, and then I installed a few planks backward the same exact way that I showed you a little bit earlier. Because I like my flooring to be transition free and continuous looking, it's very difficult to cut that very last piece here. If I start from that end and come this way, I'm not gonna know where exactly my cut is gonna land. And because of the shape of what I have here, it's gonna be very difficult to slide a piece of flooring under both these door jambs and fit it in place. So for this row, I am going to go backward and I'm going to build it exactly the opposite way. So starting from this end of the room, I put two planks together and I marked where exactly it needs to be cut. So I am going to install this little piece in place first. I'm going to place it slightly before the door jamb, and then I'm going to drive it in with my mallet and the tapping block. This is how that little piece looked like. So now I got to that very difficult piece. It's not going to be easy to install. You have to be super patient with it. You don't want to run into chances of breaking this one. If you break it, it's not going to be a fun job. You have to remove a few planks, make all those marks and cuts again, and then put this back in place. So take your time and make sure you do your best not to break any of that areas where the tongues or grooves are on this piece. I'm going to show you a close-up of this one in a few seconds. Now this is the close-up. Take a look how beautiful it turned out. If the flooring job is done right and proper, you feel like the flooring was done first and then they built the whole house on top of it. So you won't see any gaps or imperfections by the door jambs and areas like that. The rest of this closet is going to be super easy to build, but as far as this row, I'm going to start building this backward and I'm going to show you that in a few seconds. After I finish making this backward, the rest of the room is going to be super simple. Basically, I'm going to start building another 3 or 4 rows until this room is finished. As far as the underlayment, I always sweep up my floor and I only put down maybe 1 or 2 rows at a time, just to make sure there's no debris sitting under it. As you can see here, I like to install my flooring in this pattern, maybe put down 4 rows at a time. This way you don't have to move too much back and forward. It's going to be a lot easier on your own back, and the job is going to finish up a lot quicker and faster as well. Now my favorite part of the job, installing the very last row. For this job I didn't even have to cut that last one, as I only have about 3/8 of an inch of space there. I like to use this pole bar for the very last one, and I put it in place behind the actual flooring and tap the other end with my mallet. This way it's going to sit very nice and snug in place. These flooring and installation kits are available at everywhere pretty much, Home Depot, Lowe's, and all hardware stores. You can get them. They mostly include that tapping block, the mallet, this pole bar, and some spacers. There you have it, guys. The flooring is done. It looks super gorgeous. On the next video, I'm going to show you how to cover up that gap that is sitting around the room. Basically, I'm going to show you how to install coat around or baseboard. I'm going to show you how to do that without even pulling your tape measure. So there is going to be a lot of tips and tricks on that video. Make sure you don't skip it. If you like this video, I guarantee you're going to love that one as well. So one more time, thank you so much for watching my videos. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. And if you got any value out of this video, please don't forget to hit that like button. It really means a lot to me. Thank you very much. Till next time, peace.